Welcome to The Gut Show. I'm your host, Erin Judge, registered dietitian and founder of Getivate. I'm also your fellow IBS warrior. Our goal on this side of the internet is to empower those with IBS and digestive disorders to understand their gut better, to have a healthier relationship with their bodies, and to make confident choices to improve their digestive health. During this season, you can expect a conversation around a hot topic related to gut health, digestion, and IBS. As a disclaimer, I am a dietitian, but I am not your dietitian. So everything covered in this episode is meant to be educational and is purely information that you can take back to your healthcare team in order to make the best decisions for you. If you're new here and something just doesn't feel right in your gut, if your symptoms have led you to this podcast, I invite you to start by taking the quiz, What's Your Poop Personality? Your personality type will unveil what your symptoms may mean, what may be causing them, and what you can do about them. This is a free quiz and you can take it today at getivate.com or find the direct link below in the show notes. While you're going to take the quiz, let's jump into today's episode. Now for a quick word from our sponsors with resources that might support you. Is a gluten-free diet just not cutting it, or maybe not even necessary when it comes to chronic symptoms like bloating, gas, and pain? Research actually shows that in those without celiac disease, it's actually the FODMAP, the carbohydrate fructan in wheat, not gluten, that causes symptoms most often. This means that you may not need a strict gluten-free diet to see symptom relief. And it means that if you are reacting to fructans, there may be more foods in your diet beyond wheat that are causing you symptoms. This includes foods like garlic and onion, and even some fruits and vegetables that can sneak their way into your diet and contribute to those chronic symptoms. You can choose to limit these foods and reduce your overall fructan intake in order to avoid symptoms. You also have the option to break the fructan down using FODZYME, an enzyme blend that targets fructan, lactose, and GOS FODMAPs, and that will help you break these FODMAPs down to then prevent the symptoms. Learn more about FODZYME in the show notes, and you can use the code THEGUTSHOW for 20% off your first order. Did you know that you can now order your own gut health tests without waiting months for a doctor's appointment? Gemelli Biotech offers trusted, science-backed, at-home tests for conditions like SIBO, EMO, ISO, and post-infectious IBS. Their Trio Smart Breath test measures the three key gases, hydrogen, methane, and hydrogen sulfide, to detect different forms of microbial overgrowth. As for those with IBS symptoms, IBS-Smart is a simple blood test that can confirm post-infectious IBS with clinical accuracy. Validated by the leaders in gut health, these are tests that you can trust and tests that you can take comfortably from your home. So go to getgutanswers.com to find out which tests are right for you and use the code ErinJudge25, all one word, ErinJudge25, to save $25 on your order. And now let's get back to the show. As a dietitian, especially a GI dietitian, I am a big fan of diet when it comes to IBS, when it comes to GI-specific treatments and management strategies. I'm a big fan of diet interventions for gut symptoms. That is exactly what I do. It's my entire job. So of course, that is something I love and appreciate and am always advocating for. Because of that position, I often get asked what the best diet for IBS is. And so today, that is exactly what we are going to talk about. We're going to end our main season right now talking about this specific topic. And what we're going to talk about are the diets that have been studied and what that looks like. We'll also talk about some of the diets that have not been studied, but are often recommended or used, whether that be from online, social media, or what's used in some clinical practices with some doctors, because it's important to understand why they might work. So what are the theories behind them? And if that reasoning is actually worth trying, because would it actually lead to the results you're looking for, or will it lead you to some side effects and the opposite of what you're looking for? So I hope that that's what you gain from today's episode. This is not meant to be very biased at all. I do not subscribe to a specific diet that I'm going to recommend. I'll talk through a lot of different options. And I do want to make sure that we're anchored in the entire reasoning behind utilizing diet when it comes to IBS and our strategy. So diet should always lead to symptom relief and more freedom in your life because of more control of your symptoms, your condition, versus isolation and stress.
Diet should lead you forward. It should not isolate you. It should not take you backwards. It should not leave you stuck. And the diet that you choose should be sustainable. And with that sustainability in your approach, meaning you can actually use that diet and achieve that diet long term, the results of that long term improve your overall health. Your diet for one condition, one concern, should not cause more concerns or work against your longevity and your health in the future. There should be cohesion in the short-term goals of symptom management and your long-term health goals, your long-term health, longevity, all those things. So making sure we're anchored in that. If you don't believe that, that is a core belief of mine as a dietitian, this episode might not be for you, and that's okay. I think you can still gain something out of it. It's okay to have a different belief in that. You have autonomy. But if you do believe that, I think you're going to find a lot of value from today's episode. So we're going to start out strong with the most studied, most evidence-based diet approach for IBS, and that is the low FODMAP diet. This is where the majority of your research is found. There's decades of research that shows that this can work and help reduce symptoms in about 70% of IBS patients. Most of this research is done in the elimination phase. So if you're not familiar with this diet, it works in three main phases: full elimination of FODMAPs, challenges or reintroduction of these FODMAPs, and then individualization, where based on those challenges that you did with each FODMAP group, you then build these foods and introduce them back into the diet. So personalizing your diet to reduce your own triggers within the diet. FODMAPs are fermentable carbohydrates. So F is fermentable, O, D, M, A as and, P, those are all different carbohydrates, different chains. And they're found in many plant foods, as well as lactose, which is in dairy products. So they're not found in meats or fats or things like that. They are carbohydrates. When we're looking at the elimination phase and the research we have, we see symptoms reduce significantly. And because of that symptom reduction and just looking at symptom scores, there have been more research studies in the past handful of years figuring out why this actually happens. So on a very base level, why the diet was created in the first place, these foods are more gas causing. They are more fermentable. They produce more gas, especially in the colon, which is where IBS is mostly impacted. So if you're having a lot of gas production with IBS, this can lead to cramping and pain and bloating, those symptoms that are really uncomfortable because of the IBS. What else can happen is the particle size, like the size of these carbohydrates, they're malabsorbed in the small intestine. They go into the large intestine in a bigger size. And what happens is water then pulls into the gut. And we call this osmotic. It's an osmotic effect. So water is pulling into the gut because of the size of these carbohydrates. And that water can create diarrhea, sort of that flushing sensation. It also may create more bloat, more discomfort. So that's a foundational level of, okay, why does this actually happen? Now, beyond that, why is this so effective, right? Beyond just the gas or the water effect, why does this matter so much for IBS patients? Some newer evidence suggests that the elimination phase of this diet can actually help balance the dysbiosis, or the poor makeup of the gut microbiome, that we see in IBS patients. So if you study IBS versus controls at the start, they have two different makeups of bacteria. One is less ideal, which is the IBS group. They go through a low FODMAP diet. The ideal group doesn't really change, but the less ideal group, the IBS group, starts to mimic and look like that control, more ideal group. So it helps sort of shift the balance of gut microbes. There's also some evidence to show that it can improve intestinal permeability, or that leakiness of the gut, which we see in some of those with IBS. So if you already have dysbiosis and increased permeability, so that subtype of IBS, you are more likely to respond to a greater degree to the low FODMAP diet than someone with IBS that doesn't have those characteristics, which is really important. What's really interesting is that while most of the research is in this elimination phase, there was a study done from King's College in London recently, in the last 3 years. I believe 5 years for sure, that looked at the reintroduction phase. So after the diet is complete, all 3 phases are complete, what happens? So they looked at, I believe, an 8 or 8 month, 6 or 8 month follow-up. And what they found is that those who went through the full 3 phases, they were actually consuming a similar amount of FODMAPs than they were at the very beginning. So before they started the diet. So their FODMAP intake had gotten back to where they were before the diet began. However, their symptom relief that they experienced through that elimination phase maintained through the reintroduction, meaning they were able to kind of go back to their normal way of eating while still maintaining symptom relief. So there's some belief with all these newer studies that we have, there's a belief that the low FODMAP diet may kind of reset things in the gut for some. Now, in practice, I use the low FODMAP diet very often in some form or fashion. And I find that this isn't always the case. Sometimes there are certain triggers that we find within the low FODMAP diet that can't be reintroduced without triggering symptoms. I find that sometimes we can build up that tolerance of the FODMAPs through reintroduction and through other strategies, kind of that holistic way of looking at IBS. So I kind of see a little bit of all of it in practice, but it's interesting to see that with research. So this is a very effective diet. It is the most evidence-based diet approach that we have. That's why it's often recommended. It shouldn't be the first recommendation. It is highly restrictive. That's a big con to the diet, is it can be very restrictive. It can also, for some, decrease your availability of fiber and fiber diversity, which we know can work against gut health. Now, the low FODMAP diet itself, that has been debunked. There was some evidence to show that maybe some of the beneficial byproducts, so the prebiotic effect of consuming fibers, that decreased with decreasing FODMAPs because many of them are prebiotics, but that kind of bounced back and normalized throughout the rest of the diet. But if you're following this on your own and you're just eliminating and not really replacing foods, or even if you're restricting more than you actually need to be, that can all lead to problems and be less effective down the road. So not something that we want to focus on too long. The low FODMAP diet is also kind of hard to achieve if you don't have access to some of the FODMAP alternatives, because garlic and onion are two of the biggest FODMAPs and they can be difficult to replace. Or if you travel a lot, you're eating out a lot, can be very challenging. There is one other approach when it comes to a FODMAP diet, and that's called a FODMAP gentle diet. This is newer on the scene with some of the newer research, but also more of the practical anecdotal evidence that dietitians, that practitioners, that we actually see when working with patients, because many of us, we don't actually go through this structured 3-phase diet. We usually will do a moderate, kind of more modified elimination, and then a more strategic challenge and reintroduction for most patients. And that's what we call more of a personalized FODMAP gentle. That's where we look at the diet recall, like a log, look at your symptoms. We maybe reduce or replace some of the most widely eaten FODMAPs. So if you're eating a lot of garlic, we might replace just the garlic without focusing on all the other FODMAPs. And then we see if symptoms improve, maybe eliminate a little bit more if they don't, or move forward with the challenge if they do, confirm our suspicion, move forward from there. So that's a FODMAP gentle approach. There's emerging research on what we can call a step up gentle approach, which might be more clearly defined as FODMAP gentle in the future. And that's looking at some of the research. Most of this came out of the University of Michigan. Their team has done a lot of the FODMAP research I even hinted to earlier on like intestinal permeability, dysbiosis. So if you're looking for that, look for University of Michigan, Prashant Singh, William Che, some of the doctors that are heavily researching these topics. But they were looking at there's them, and then there's one other group that looked at the most common challenges, the most common FODMAPs that cause symptoms. So is it necessary to avoid all FODMAP groups? And our FODMAP groups include fructose, mannitol, sorbitol, those are polyols, lactose, galacto-oligosaccharides or GOS, and then fructans. So we have a handful of different groups. So the theory was, do we need to eliminate all of these groups, Or are there some of these groups that are more commonly triggers, which is something we do see in practice, that we could start with before eliminating more? So avoid unnecessary restriction. So the research shows that the most common FODMAPs are GOS, mannitol, and fructan, which is interesting. So there might be a step-up approach that can allow you to eliminate only a few groups without eliminating all the groups, so that it feels more manageable. Lactose could probably be thrown in there if you are intolerant. That one's an easier one to eliminate because there's a lot of lactose-free dairy products and dairy alternatives out there. However, that can be tested for, so you can confirm lactose intolerance to see if this is one that is necessary. So that's an added bonus. If you don't have symptom improvement with that initial elimination, then you would move to the other groups like fructose, sorbitol, lactose, see if symptoms improve then, and then move forward with your challenges. So the benefit to this is that you may be able to eliminate less, which is always a benefit, and kind of zero in a little bit faster on what's causing you symptoms in the first place. However, you could also be extending your elimination phase if that initial elimination of those fewer groups is not successful for you. So it can kind of go either way, and it really depends on the person. There's also not a lot of guidance around this yet because it is very personalized. So if we look at a lot of the FODMAP resources, and there are a lot of them, there are apps. We have the Monash app, FODMAP friendly app, that have databases of all the FODMAPs in foods. Both of them will kind of help guide you through elimination at least. And it's going to be all the groups. So there's currently not a lot of resources for saying, oh, I only want to eliminate these 2 groups. That's something that, again, is done a bit more personalized with a dietitian, is the approach to take now, which if you take that approach, you're likely just going to go through that personalized, more targeted, gentle approach than this kind of step-up approach. So we definitely need some more resources around this. And additional research on, okay, what happens whenever we do the challenges and, all this stuff. And even with the low FODMAP diet as a whole, we do still need more of that long-term research to best know what happens when we add these foods back in. How long can we see that benefit? How do we optimize that benefit? That's all really, really important to make sure that what you're doing is going to last with you, because IBS is chronic. So it is important to understand. Another diet that is out there that has been more popular for the IBS space only recently. However, it has been popular for health for a very long time. It always comes on top as the best diet, the most effective diet for many health outcomes, and that is the Mediterranean diet. So research shows that this pattern of eating can be supportive for gut health long-term, but also cardiovascular health and metabolic health, which is where it's studied the most. There's some evidence in immune health and looking at like anti-inflammatory properties to the diet for autoimmune conditions or inflammatory states. Also looking at cognitive neurofunction to help with preventing neurodegenerative diseases. This diet has been very thoroughly studied in different aspects of health and longevity and has been shown to be very effective. Now, the research on the Mediterranean diet and IBS does show promise. It's just lacking a little bit, but there is a little bit of data to suggest it can reduce symptoms and lower IBS risk due to those anti-inflammatory properties of the diet. There was a pilot study that was done out of that University of Michigan team that I mentioned earlier, and they compared the Mediterranean diet to a low FODMAP diet. And what they found is that both diets worked. So the Mediterranean diet did provide symptom relief. However, it was a little less than the low FODMAP diet. So in the Mediterranean diet group, we 73% of patients that improved, which is still very, very good. That was compared to almost 82% in the low FODMAP groups. Less effective the low FODMAP diet when we compared the two, still better than a placebo, better than nothing, right? Still effective for many people. There may be a way to combine, right? Because this diet focuses heavily on fiber and fiber diversity, which is going to improve gut health. It also focuses on healthy fats, which is where that anti-inflammatory piece comes into play, which again will help with intestinal permeability, the gut microbiome, all of those different things. The downside of this approach is that this diet may cause you to eat more FODMAPs. So again, there may be a value in combining the two. The benefit of the diet as well is that it does encourage whole foods versus processed foods, and that may also be supportive. So there's a lot of pieces to this that can be really effective. Truly, we need more research, not just comparing it to diet strategies we already have, but in the absence of a low FODMAP diet, are we going to see benefit to a Mediterranean diet? And then when we do compare the two and patients continue on them, subjects of the research studies continue, do we see a difference in outcomes over time? Does the low FODMAP diet perform better over time, or does a Mediterranean diet? Because we may see a longer time, like a longer duration of using the diet to see symptom relief, but maybe the gut becomes a lot more resilient and we see more relief that's steady over time. That's what I would suspect. And so I would love to see more research there. We just don't currently have it. So it's not to say it's not available, we just don't have it. So as crazy as it is, that's really the bulk of the research that we have around diet and IBS. There is a little bit of diet or guidelines or research done on NICE guidelines, which are just kind of general, like less alcohol, less processed food, lower fats, kind of this well-rounded approach, less stress, sleeping, some moving your body, general healthy recommendations that shows a benefit, but not as heavily focused just on diet, just kind of some small tweaks versus like a really big intervention and lifestyle change. But that does exist. So there are some benefits to that. Those are recommendations that we typically make before we get into some of these more intensive diets. I find that a bit of a NICE guidelines, a few different strategies of healthy behaviors, implement that first, build a Mediterranean diet, and then utilize a low FODMAP diet if we're still seeing symptoms. That's the approach I typically will take. That's what we lay out in our membership program, step by step for you. So if you want that, it's in the show notes if you need that guidance, and that's connected with you. But let's talk about some of the other diets that exist, because while we don't have a lot of robust research on other diets, people are recommending diets all the time. You've probably had, if you've told anyone you have IBS or gut issues or whatever, you've probably had someone recommend a diet to you. You've also probably scrolled social media and saw people following all these diets and talking about how they did this thing and it cured their gut and it healed everything or whatever it may be, all these claims of their own experiences. So let's talk through some of those and why those claims may be made, why people may see a benefit, and what to consider. Now for a quick word from our sponsors with resources that might support you.
Are you taking a prescription medicine for irritable bowel syndrome with constipation, or IBS-C? If symptoms like constipation, belly pain, and bloating are still bothering you, it may be time to try something different. Ibsrela, tenapanor, is a prescription medicine used to treat adults with IBS-C. Ibsrela works differently to relieve the symptoms of IBS-C so that you can focus on what's important to you. Ask your doctor if Ibsrela could be right for you. Do not give Ibsrela to children less than 6 years of age. You should not give Ibsrela to children 6 to less than 18 years. It may harm them. The most common side effect is diarrhea, sometimes severe, and your child could get severe dehydration. Stop taking Ibsrela and call your doctor if you develop severe diarrhea. Do not take Ibsrela if you have a bowel blockage. Tell your doctor if you are pregnant or breastfeeding and about the medicines you take. Other common side effects include swelling or a feeling of fullness or pressure in your abdomen, gas, or dizziness. Learn more at ibsrela.com/PI or call 1-844-IBSRELA and press option 4. Ready to try something different for your IBS-C symptoms? Ask your doctor about Ibsrela.
Are you struggling with bloating, constipation, or diarrhea, and you're still waiting to see your doctor?
Take control and get answers with Gemelli Biotech's at-home gut health tests.
The Trio Smart Breath Test is the only at-home test that is validated to look for all 3 gases that are associated with microbial overgrowth: hydrogen, methane, and hydrogen sulfide. That means it can detect SIBO, EMO, and ISO in one simple test. It ships right to your door, no appointment needed. You take it and you send it back, then you get answers. If your IBS symptoms started after a stomach bug or food poisoning, it could be post-infectious IBS. The IBS-Smart blood test is a quick at-home test to help identify it. Fun fact, 1 in 9 people who get food poisoning will end up with post-infectious IBS, and most don't even know they have it.
With both of Gemelli Biotech's tests,
You'll get clinically backed results in about a week, and you can take them straight to your provider. No waiting, no referrals, just answers. Find out which tests are right for you at getgutanswers.com and use the code AaronJudge25, all one word, AaronJudge25, to save $25 on your order. You can also find all these details in your show notes.
as someone with IBS-C, I've struggled with symptoms related to food for the majority of my life, specifically FODMAPs. My personal triggers, beans, dairy products, garlic, and onion, would leave me feeling bloated and uncomfortable after meals, especially whenever I was eating out or traveling or living my life outside of my home, which meant I either had to just deal with the symptoms or eat bland, awful food and miss out on experiencing the social interactions and the joy of food. Finding FODZYME was a game changer for me. This is an enzyme blend that targets FODMAPs, specifically the GOS that's found in beans, fructan in the garlic, onion, wheat, and even different fruits and vegetables, as well as lactose in dairy products. I stash this in my wallet, my husband's wallet, every bag I own. I take it with me everywhere I go so that I can simply sprinkle it on my meals, eat with confidence, and feel my best after. If you want to try FODZYME for yourself, go to FODZYME.com and don't forget to use the code THEGUTSHOW, all one word, THEGUTSHOW, for 20% off your first order.
And now let's get back to the show.
So one of them is a low fermentation diet, and this is most often used in the SIBO community. This, I think, had been around before the masked Dr. Pimentel's research team out of Cedars-Sinai that has done a lot of SIBO research. Their team recommends this. They wrote a book on this, but I believe the diet had been around before that. It's similar to a low FODMAP diet. So it is lower FODMAP, but it's not fully low FODMAP. But a similar approach to that kind of service level piece, right? Decrease fermentation, decrease gas. With SIBO and bacterial overgrowth, there is a lot more gas being produced. So it makes sense. If we decrease some of the gas foods, then we would decrease gas production from the overgrowth, and then symptoms may improve, which can be beneficial. This has never been studied. And unfortunately, this diet does typically recommend some pretty high FODMAP foods like garlic and onion. So for those who are very FODMAP sensitive, this may not help as much. It may not be as effective. There's also fewer resources and tools available for it. There's a book, again, by that Cedars-Sinai team, which is helpful. There are more resources now just with the SIBO advocacy that's happening. But a low FODMAP diet is a lot more studied, and there's a lot of miscommunication around low fermentation, that it's easier to follow than low FODMAP. But I find that because there's more resources and tools and databases for low FODMAP, to me, that's actually a lot easier. It's easier for me to teach. It's easier for me to follow. I think it's a lot easier to follow, but each person's going to think about it differently. So it could be helpful. There's no major harm in it. The biggest harm I think that can be done, or risk involved with this diet, is that those in this community that recommend it sometimes will recommend this for life. And that worries me because, again, we don't have any research to suggest that that's necessary. And that level of restriction and fear that this is going to make the overgrowth come back or cause more of the symptoms, that can really get deep-seated in a lot of people and lead to really extreme fear of food and a lot of isolation. And again, that doesn't meet those criteria of what we're actually looking for with an intervention and a treatment strategy. So I don't use this diet ever in practice. If someone's following it because they found it on their own, they want to follow it, they feel like it's beneficial, we may go for it. And then as we get further along in their treatment, look at, okay, reintroducing some of these foods back in. And then if it's not working as well, we may look at other FODMAPs that might be present and kind of shift it to a low FODMAP diet, which can be kind of easy to do since some of the FODMAPs have already been reduced. Another one I'm kind of combining two, and that's keto to carnivore. So keto was the big thing, 10 years ago. And in the last 5 years, that's really shifted towards carnivore. These are similar in that there's more of a focus on fats and proteins, less of a focus on carbohydrates. So it's a very low carbohydrate diet. Where kind of carnivore comes into play is there's more of a focus on animal products and meats versus just low carb. And so it may turn into zero carb for some carnivore eaters, but there's a lot of overlap between these of keto and carnivore. And they're very highly advocated for in the GI space. And I don't love that, but here's why it's there. So people are using these diets. Primarily, this has been used for weight loss, right? This was heavily used for weight loss for both keto and carnivore at the start. But in the last few years, there's been a lot more focus on its health benefits, and especially looking at gut health. So anytime I post anything that's meant to have a wider reach, that's showing, okay, relatability of being constipated or having gut symptoms or being bloated, someone's always coming through to say, like, eat carnivore and you'll never be bloated again, or whatever it may be. The reason why people see less bloating, gas, maybe less constipation or diarrhea in some cases, is that there's fewer FODMAPs because no carbohydrates are present, except lactose. Again, the dairy may be used, so lactose may be the kind of the one that's left. And some people are going to actually really ramp up their lactose intake, and that can cause opposite problems. But the fewer FODMAPs, nothing is really fermentable. Proteins are fermentable over time, which is not a good thing. We don't want to ferment proteins. That typically leads to hydrogen sulfide production that feeds less beneficial microbes, and that can be a bad thing. So the long-term piece there is really important to consider. But in the short term, gas and bloat might be reduced because we don't have fibers, carbohydrates feeding microbes and producing gas. So that's one reason that may happen. We have no research on this diet for gut health, gut outcomes, IBS, any of that. However, we do have research looking at dietary patterns in gut health, where that Mediterranean diet fits in, right? A focus on fiber diversity, plant-based, plant-forward ways of eating, healthy fats. The opposite of that is we do have research showing higher saturated fat intake, as well as more processed foods, but even just isolating saturated fats in red meats specifically, low fiber diets specifically, and poor gut health outcomes. More dysbiosis, more rates of colon cancer, inflammatory bowel disease, major problems we want to avoid. So if you are eating a diet that is low fiber, high in red meats, and high in saturated fats, that could be problematic. Now, do we have research that's looking at a carnivore diet specifically? No, but we probably will because it's being used frequently right now. But those negative risks, those negative effects are not going to show up within a week or even a couple of months, maybe not even a year of consuming this diet. It shows up many years down the road. So we're not going to see all the problems from this yet. And in this community, unfortunately, it is all about personal experience. So people will say, all my gut issues stopped and I've been perfect. My labs improved. I feel the best I've ever felt in my entire life. I have more energy. Everything is cured and fixed. And maybe they've been using the diet for a year, a couple of years, a few months, but we don't know what's happening under the surface. And like, especially with colon cancer, inflammatory bowel disease, inflammation in the gut, we may not see that again until much later down the road. And symptoms are usually the thing to show up once things have progressed. So that can be problematic. In the short term though, not everyone sees symptom relief. These diets, because there's a lack of fiber, tend to cause constipation. And sometimes that's like a flex of people who are using the diet. It's like, I only poop once a week now. That's not a good thing. But they have less that's forming their poop. So that may be why, like less fiber, less poop that's being formed. That's not a good thing. Pooping is a way of detoxifying the body. It's very important. It's a waste removal service in our body, right? We remove fibers, yes. We're also removing other stuff. And so that's not a good thing. That is something that we want to be careful with. So do I recommend this? Never. If you're using it, do I judge you for it? No, but please don't recommend it broadly for other people. I think there's a lot of harm that can be done with these diets. And especially when we're looking at gut health, there's a lot of long-term risks that we know based on research. And if you want to throw research out the window, again, that's your choice, but make sure you make that statement of, I'm choosing not to follow the research that's available. This is why I'm making this decision, and be prepared to take on the liability and the risk of that recommendation you're making to other people. Even if it's just a little comment, try this. You are taking on the liability of them trying it and it leading to issues. And I do think, I always joke that if I could have a different career and I was like disciplined enough to go back to school, I'd become a lawyer. And these are the types of like litigation I would go after, is really narrowing in on a lot of these health recommendations that are extremely harmful, that cause direct risk. You can prove that with a change and like really close monitoring. And I think a lot of people are going to regret those decisions. So be careful, make your choices for your own body, yes, but please don't do harm for others. Another kind of opposite end of the spectrum, but looking at restrictive diets, is a vegan diet or fully plant-based. Now there's versions of this. There's vegetarian diets. I'm technically a pescatarian myself, so I will be honest about that. But vegan diets are where there's no animal products present at all. So these tend to be lower in saturated fat, higher fiber, typically more diverse fiber, and a heavy focus on legumes, especially beans, because of the protein. And this way of eating, like these different foods, are associated with beneficial gut outcomes. Less dysbiosis, more beneficial bacteria, improved intestinal permeability, less inflammation can be really helpful. A lot of people on a vegan diet also subscribe to a whole food, plant-based way of eating, which means less processed foods, which might be beneficial. This is often lactose-free, right? Because dairy is gone. So lactose is being removed. However, it is often high FODMAP and sometimes very, very high fiber. So gas, bloating, more constipation or diarrhea could be present with this way of eating, especially if you switch to a vegan diet really quickly. What's also important to know is that we have research on, again, sort of like the opposite of the keto carnivore piece. We do have research on more fiber, especially plant-based proteins like beans, healthy fats from plant sources, less saturated fat, like fiber diversity. We know that those are important for gut outcomes, and even IBS, like those things can be really beneficial. We don't have a lot of research on vegan diet specific and IBS. So I would love to see that, because I know this is heavily recommended within our IBS communities. There are dietitians that only focus on this as their way of eating. That is all that they teach. That is the only thing that they subscribe to. What I think we need to recognize is that, or the question I guess we should ask is that level of restriction necessary to get the benefits? Or can you get the benefits with some tweaks by adding to your diet, maybe more of a Mediterranean diet approach that still includes lean proteins and different animal products and flexibility? Do you still get the same benefit? You likely do. The research supports that. So in my practice, what I recommend for clients, if they're following a vegan diet, I'll support clients. There are other reasons for following a diet that are beyond just health and symptoms and treatment. There's a lot of ethical concerns people have when it comes to animal agriculture, and I respect that. If that is something that someone really cares about and they want to follow, we can work with a vegan diet a lot easier than we can work with a carnivore or a keto diet, truly. But if you're thinking that you have to follow a vegan diet to get symptom relief and get results, that may not be true. You may have been a bit like misled a bit by someone who is really highly restrictive themselves, and that's something that they believe in. But it's okay to take a little bit from those recommendations, align it with your own intuition, but also the scope of research across the board, and then modify your diet accordingly. What's also important to note is that for some people, a vegan diet is going to cause you more symptoms. High fiber, high FODMAP, it may not work for you. And that is okay. That doesn't mean you fail or that you have to keep pushing through. Like, work with a dietitian that's going to work with you, not make you subscribe to their way. I don't make my clients be a pescatarian. Like, I don't even really talk about it that much. This is my way of eating based on my preferences, some of my other concerns, like my health, whatever. I have a lot of reasons for it myself, but I'm not putting that on someone else, because I don't believe everyone has to subscribe to that same way of eating that I'm subscribed to, right? And whenever I'm serving a patient or a client in practice, I want to meet them where they are, work with their body, their preferences, their cultural background, what's available, all of those things to help them find the best approach for them, which means taking into account all of these details and then figuring out which way to go with it. So that's really important. And I want to make sure I make that clear. So those are the top diets that are typically recommended. There's also the standard American diet, or the SAD diet, that is the high processed foods, increased saturated fats, high intake of red meats, sodas, added sugars, not the best approach. That's definitely going to lead to poor health outcomes. It's never recommended as a treatment. It's usually what we're fighting against. And then if you're thinking about the dietary guidelines for Americans, where they have been, I know they're in talk of maybe being replaced, even though no one's really following them. I think it's less than 10% of Americans actually follow the dietary guidelines for Americans. They align most with the Mediterranean diet. So we don't even have to really talk about those because they do align with the research, which is why they were developed by the professionals in the first place. But I digress. We're not going to get into that too much. Another thing that happens when it comes to diet recommendations is the conversation around fiber. There is a big shift towards more in this plant-based kind of vegan space too, but a shift towards more fiber is better. There is a limit to fiber. You do not have to have more, and everyone's going to have their own tolerable limit when it comes to fiber. And so if you're seeing those messages and you're thinking, I need to add more fiber, that may not be true. And there is some belief, and again, we need more research. There's some research being done on like fiber additives and like isolated fibers, like with certain supplements and things like that, or high fiber products, high fiber sodas, where there could be a negative when it comes to the gut microbiome and inflammation with these. And again, we need more research in humans. This is like very early stages, but I think it just comes back to show that we don't have to pump everything with fiber. A whole foods primarily based diet is a great approach. A well-balanced diet, focus on a diversity of plant foods, lean proteins, good quality food that you can eat, you can enjoy. And that's going to lead to the best benefits. And if you need help modifying specific fiber amounts, whether you need to increase or decrease, again, I'm going to plug our membership program because I guide you through that. We have a process for it where you can track where you're at currently based on your symptoms, determine, do I increase, decrease? How do I go about that? What am I monitoring? So we have that available for you because there's not a perfect science to it. We have recommendations for fiber intake, and those are based on research in healthy populations, but we don't have IBS specific recommendations because everyone is likely so different. And there's just a lot of factors at play when it comes to diet alone, but also just with fiber intake. I hope that this was a helpful episode. I hope that you took something away. And if I missed a big one that you feel like we didn't get to, I apologize. Definitely message me, share on Instagram or wherever, and let me know. And then maybe we can build that into a bonus episode or an episode next season. Make sure we're hitting on that as much as possible. If you did have a fun takeaway as we wrap up this main season, we'll come back eventually. But if you had a big takeaway, this was helpful for you, or favorite episode this season, please share it with a friend, subscribe, leave a good review. It really does mean so much. So if you found value, that's all I ask. Please leave a review and share it with a friend so that we can continue reaching more people and getting resources into people's hands, which is the whole point of this show to begin with. Thank you for joining me this season. It was a pleasure and honor of mine, and I'll see you in our next season.
Are you listening to today's episode with the main thought being, what are the steps that I can take to get rid of my symptoms right now? While I hope that the information that we share in every episode of The Gut Show leaves you feeling more empowered and more confident in your body, it's not always going to solve your problem or give you a clear direction for your specific symptoms and your needs. The Master Method membership is an online program for the person with chronic digestive symptoms and IBS who wants step-by-step guidance to understand their body, address the drivers of IBS, reduce symptoms, and build resilience in your gut long-term. This membership includes a step-by-step course and a dietitian-led community that teaches you how to holistically address each symptom and the IBS drivers, how to reduce symptoms more strategically and with confidence, and guidelines for better gut health long-term so that you're not only thinking about today, but you're also improving your outcomes in the future. It is time to ditch the symptoms and get your life back. The membership is your first step. You can learn more and enroll at IBSmastermethod.com and use the code GUTSHOW, GUTSHOW, GUTSHOW for $25 off your enrollment fee.